Welcome to another outstanding City Club Forum. My name is Susan Kelly, president of the club. Today we have the opportunity to learn about the economic impact of Oregon's wine industry. Our panel of experts couldn't be more qualified to educate on that subject. They're Dick Ponzi of Ponzi Vineyards, who will provide an overview and serve as moderator, Jim Bernau of Willamette Valley Vineyards, Karen Hinsdale, president of the Cellar Door, and Lynn Penner-Ash of Penner-Ash Wine Cellars. This program is part of a series on the wine industry co-sponsored by 3 standing committees of the City Club. It's the Arts and Culture, the New Leaders, and the Growth, Management, and Environment Committees. We're grateful to them for making this program possible. This is also in conjunction with a couple of recent past very, very successful gatherings. 2 weeks ago, there were 85 people at the wine tasting event with Dick Ponzi at the Lawrence Gallery in the Pearl District. That was great. And then the Growth Management Committee did an excellent job at their brown bag lunch with Dick Tonnell from Brickhouse Winery, and of course today. And also there is a flyer in the back on future Arts and Culture Committee gatherings. Next week, on the 22nd, join us for a program featuring John Russell, who is chair of the board of the Portland Development Commission. He will outline the results of a recently published study of the health of the business climate in Portland, and we're all very, very concerned with that issue, so I hope you'll be able to attend here at the Multnomah Athletic Club. Please note that our annual fundraising campaign is well underway, and though we are to our halfway mark, we certainly need your contributions and your support. Whether you're a guest or a member of City Club, please consider a donation. And there are cards on the table. Anyone interested in obtaining a video or audio tape of this or any other City Club program may do so by calling Suzanne in our office. For audio, it's $10, and video, it's $20. Our board host today, seated at the head table, is Patty Tillett, a recent past president of the board and a member of the Board of Governors. He is a principal with Zimmer Gunsel Frasca, and he will have the privilege of asking the first question. Following Patty's question, we'll open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience, and please line up behind the microphone as soon as Patty has finished asking his question, so we have as much time as possible for lots of questions of our speakers. Broadcast of City Club program this quarter is made possible in part by the corporate underwriting of Pacific Care, Pope and Talbot, and Weyerhaeuser Company Foundation. We are very grateful for their support. I will give a brief intro to Dick Ponzi, and then he will take it from there. Richard Ponzi's education and early career were in the aerospace industry and designing park rides for Disneyland and Disney World. He and his wife, Nancy, couldn't resist the lure of Oregon and the wine business and essentially moved here in 1970 and started it. Dick was a founding member of the Oregon Wine Growers Association and the Oregon Wine Advisory Board, and he and Nancy co-founded the first microbrewery in Oregon, which is Bridgeport Brewery. In 1988, I love this piece, Dick won a national competition to design and construct the nation's first and only weather machine, which is located in our very own Pioneer Courthouse Square. And such a delight to all of us and our children, and I hope my grandchildren. It's just the best thing. He is the recipient of many awards in the wine industry and very successful with both his Pinot Noirs and Pinot Gris, just to name a few. So with that, Dick.
Well, thank you, Susan. I hope the weather machine lasts long enough so your grandchildren can appreciate it. I think it's been operating for some 10 years now, so we've gone through the warranty period, so I think it's fine. I have the distinction of being the moderator, and I've never been a moderator before, but at least I'm with good company here. These are all friends of mine, so whatever is said here today, you have to understand that it's done in a friendly manner, even though there may be some remarks that may not sound so friendly to you. We're going to have 3 people speaking today on the industry, and I think it is a wonderful opportunity, and I do want to thank the City Club for allowing us to have a platform where we can explain to you about the industry, the future, and more importantly, I want to talk about the uniqueness of the wine industry, the Oregon wine industry. But before I go into it, I want to introduce the three panelists. And on my left is Lynn Penner-Ash. And she grew up in Washington, D.C., and attended the University of California at Davis. And as more of you know, or most of you might know, that was the school for winemaking. I think Oregon has made some changes to that effect. She majored in fermentation science. She was an enologist for Stag's Leap Winery for 4 years, and then realized that there were places other than California where you could grow grapes. In 1988, she came to Oregon, became the winemaker for Rex Hill Winery. And I know most of you know that winery. She later became president of Rex Hill Winery and has won many, many awards and had been recognized for her wines and what she had done at Rex Hill. This recent year, she has broken away and with her husband, Ron, are starting Penner-Ash Wine Cellars. And I think you can expect great things happening there. Some of her credentials and activities: she's past president of the International Pinot Noir Celebration, which has become truly international. She currently serves on the board of directors as the winemaker and serves on the board. She has received many awards, as I mentioned. Her wines have been mentioned in worldwide publications, including Wine Spirits and the Wine Spectator. So she is going to give us an insight to the evolution of the industry and what is happening with the new wineries that are coming on and some of the activities that the industry has been involved with from the winemaking end of it. And to her left is Jim Bernau, who is going to talk to us on the economics of Oregon wines. And he is a long list of things here. He's the founder of the Willamette Valley Vineyards. He's president and chair of and board of directors. He started the vineyard in 1983 and had their first vintage in 1988. He's president of the Oregon Wine Growers Political Action Committee, which has been a very effective committee to help the industry and to promote the interest of the industry, both with the legislature and with the community. He is president of the Oregon Wine Growers Association. He's the chair of the Oregon Wine Advisory Board and is the chair of the Board Promotions Committee. And he also has to deal with 4,000 stockholders. Is that right, 4,000? Okay. There are only 5 people in our family, and I only have to deal with 4 other people, so he's got a job there, I'm sure. And to his left is Karen Hinsdale, and she's going to talk to us about the distribution and marketing of the Oregon wines. Karen is a native of Oregon, as Jim Bernau is, and she was raised in Klamath Falls, was educated in Oregon, and this is very important to the industry. In 1972, she was co-owner and marketing director for Henny Hinsdale's premium wine distributorship in Oregon. In 1970, there wasn't much in the way of wines. As I mentioned in one of the other programs, Oregon was pretty much a wasteland for culinary interests and wine interests. But fortunately for the wine industry, we had Karen, who was marketing premium wines and particularly was a strong supporter of Oregon wines. Currently, she has her business, the Cellar Door, which is a personal wine buying service. So if any of you are interested in establishing a wine cellar or interested in having banquets, Karen is certainly the one who's well qualified to help you with those choices. She was the chair of the Metropolitan Family Services Wine Auction, and she's currently trustee of the Multnomah County Library Foundation. Now, I'm going to give you a list of some of the other things that she has been involved with and is involved with, and I had to clip this out because I couldn't write all this, but it gives you an idea of her activities and her interests. She's a member of the Multnomah County Library Board. She's the board of the Oregon chapter of the American Cancer Society, board of the Waverly Children's Home, board of the Metropolitan Family Services, Salute Auction Committee, board of the Culinary Alliance, trustee, Oregon chapter of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society Foundation, board of Portland State University, board of the Oregon Beer and Wine Dealers Association, board of Women for Wine Sense, and trustee for the National Symphony Orchestra at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Now that's something. I mean, that just shows you the kind of energy this woman has. So I think we have a group of well-qualified speakers today, and I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I do want to stress a point that dear to my heart, and I think important for you to know. And since I am kind of the senior member here of this panel, I'm going to have to bring in a little bit of history. And the history was that Oregon's industry really started in after Prohibition in modern days, these modern days, in the late 60s and mid 70s, and up until today. Now, when we talk about the Oregon wine industry, we have to remember or know that really Oregon is broken up into many wine regions. And the Willamette Valley is one region and predominant in the sense that it has more wineries than, say, the other parts of the state. There's also the southern part of the state, another region. And there's also another section of the state, which is the Columbia Basin area. Now, these are regions that on their own have to be understood in terms of the climatic conditions. Willamette Valley being cooler than the southern part of the state, which is much warmer. And that's very important to know and to relate to the industry for wine growing, basically. The early people who came here, some settled in the southern part of the state and some settled in the northern part of the state. I think, fortunately, most of us settled in the northern part of the state back in the 70s for the reason that the Willamette Valley gave a climate to Pinot Noir that was suited, and more suited than anything else at that time period. And to give you an idea how Pinot Noir was viewed during the 70s, coming out of California, there were some Pinot Noir wines made by only maybe one or two well-made wines as Pinot Noir. Most of the Pinot Noir that was planted in California was planted in the wrong places, but used as blending wines to making sparkling wines. So consequently, the consumer was not quite aware of what was Pinot Noir and what should it really taste like. And of course, if you had a budget that would allow you to buy some Burgundies, you could appreciate what that Pinot Noir wine or grape could create. So not many Americans, I have to say, understood what Pinot Noir was. But this small group of people, probably a half a dozen in the late 70s, took on the project of growing Pinot Noir, selecting the Willamette Valley as the area for Pinot Noir, and also having the nerve to go out and market what they were saying is Pinot Noir. Now, I want to just read a quote just to give you an idea of some of the difficulties one could have with Pinot Noir. James Halliday is a famous, well-known writer out of Australia who has also written the Wine Atlas of California. And his comment in this book, and he covers all of the areas of California from the LA area all the way up into the northern regions of California. And if you read through the book, he makes references to Pinot Noir. And really, I think this quote that I've selected here, it gives you an idea of how he views it and how really the world views Pinot Noir, at least people who drink Pinot Noir. He says, even in Burgundy, Pinot Noir is a temperamental and fickle mistress, reacting viciously to seasonal conditions which do not suit it. The truly great vintages occur less frequently, seldom more than 2 in a decade. It is also an extremely reluctant traveler. No other European country has succeeded with this variety. Well, there you are. We've got a wine here called Pinot Noir that is difficult to make. It doesn't travel well, and Oregon has taken the challenge on. So back in the 70s, if you can imagine, taking your wares to the big markets, the sophisticated markets of Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., and trying to sell your product and showing them this pale red wine and telling them that it's from Oregon, and they say, excuse me, where is Oregon? All right? So you explain that it's somewhere between Washington, south of Washington, and north of California. And then you tell them that it's from the Willamette River or Willamette Valley, and then you have to correct them on that. And then you have to tell them that it's Pinot Noir that you're selling. So we had a lot of strikes against us right from the beginning. But I have to say that over the years, and with the improvement of the wine quality and the attention given to this particular variety, Oregon has really benefited. It's unique. You can't grow Pinot Noir anywhere in the world. There are very select areas. And I think that Oregon, and during this period of the 70s, it was proven that the Willamette Valley was definitely the area for Pinot Noir. So now you find Oregon Pinot Noirs served at the White House. You see them served in very fancy restaurants in New York. You see them asking for Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, maybe something from Chehalem Mountains, or maybe something from Eola Hills, or maybe even the Tualatin Valley. So we've taught them how to pronounce some of our terms, and they're accepting them and actually searching for them. So I think we've come a long way, and I think what the panel will do, I hope, is bring you up to date more, the economics of it, the size of it, where it's going, and how we're going to get there. So, Lynn? Oh, I'm sorry.
Jim.
Right. Jim.
To show again.
My responsibility today is to just kind of put the Oregon wine industry in some context economically. I was at a recent meeting at Rex Hill Winery with Paul Hart and Sue Horstman, who is here, who heads up the Oregon Pinot Camp and the Yamhill County Wineries Association, along with a person from the Department of Economic Development in Salem, Tom Fox. And he said to us, he says, you know, public policymakers don't regard the Oregon wine industry with any kind of seriousness. And we were surprised by that because, you know, there are obviously differences in our political parties and people, and certainly the people who come from our areas where we are winemaking do take us seriously. But he said, what is needed is a much better picture of the contribution that the Oregon wine industry makes to Oregon and Oregon's economy. Well, we have almost no data on this subject. Washington recently commissioned a study that they spent over $50,000 paying for, which I have here. It was done by the nation's, probably the nation's best informed accounting firm, Motto, Krala, and Fisher out of Napa Valley. I have the study here. And for this $50,000, they developed a series of financial models to determine the financial impacts the Washington wine industry has on Washington. And the news when this study was released was shocking. Over $2.5 billion worth of economic impact a year annually the Washington wine industry is contributing to their state. So I took the cheap approach. I took their study, and then I added up the number of wineries and vineyards and tons per acre and yield. And so I have some news for you. Now, obviously, this is information's worth about what I put into it. But still, using a little bit of extrapolation, here are the similarities between ourselves and Washington. Now, Oregon, as you know or may know, ranks second in the country in number of wineries. But most of us are small, very small. In fact, there's over 200 wineries in Oregon now, 160 in Washington. Now, Oregon ranks 4th in total output of wine by states. There's 520 growers in Oregon, 350 that are independent. There's 250 growers in Washington. We have 11,100 acres at the time this study was done, so I had to use acreage numbers that compared. I couldn't use the latest data because their data is a little older. They have 24,000, but now you can see the relative weights. I'll keep going. We have, in terms of value of crop, they had about 64 million in terms of just crop value. We had at the time of the study around 28 million. So if you do a little math and apply some of these numbers without us having actual statistical data and reports from all the wineries, it is amazing what the Oregon wine industry is contributing to our economy. Well over $500 million a year to the Oregon economy. In direct jobs, 560. Indirect jobs, total direct and indirect jobs, 270, compared to the 11,250 in Washington. In terms of wine bottles, over 13 million a year. Oregon wineries pay over $1 million in property tax and contribute over 20 million in overall tax revenues to the state through the various activities, indirect and direct, that they generate. Now, there's a couple of differences that are important. One is that Washington, like New Zealand and Australia and California, are exporters. Washington exports 75% of what they produce. And of course, Australia and New Zealand, those are exporting. I mean, they couldn't possibly drink all the wine there, as much as they may try. On that point, actually, I was going to tell you there are corks on the back table, but I can see that you're not going to need any corks to take the bottles home. The Oregon wine industry exports about 50% of what it produces. 1% of the American population here in Oregon consumes 50% of what we produce. And you're all doing your share, aren't you? Maybe that's our problem. Well, not anymore. When you hear about some of the issues that we're facing, we do have an awful lot of vineyards that are going. In fact, among our vineyards now, in our vineyards, we have over 21% of our vineyards are still not producing in Oregon. In other words, they're still young. They're still babies, grapelings, still yet to produce a commercial crop. And so we have more grapes coming. So start working out. Now, when you look at our cooperage capacity, it's really something. We have over 5.5 million gallons of cooperage capacity in Oregon. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that this is a very serious business and a tremendous amount of capital. In fact, about $250 million of capital has been invested in Oregon vineyards, wineries, and inventory. Now, if you take a look at the farm gate income of Oregon wine grapes, you factor in the fact that almost all of those wine grapes are processed by Oregon wineries, and you compare that to the commodity income of relative crops produced in Oregon, you'll find that Oregon wine grapes contribute about the same amount as wheat. In fact, if you go and look further at the farming activities and the capital investments required of other farm crops, you'll find that the Oregon wine industry, in terms of total capital brought to bear on its industry, ranks within the top 5 of all Oregon agricultural products. Now, that's shocking. And that's something that really, until I started working with this, I didn't really fully come to realize. Now, our industry faces a lot of challenges. Here in Oregon, it's development. You know, the pioneers, like the Ponzi family, the Lett family, came and found these extraordinary sites where they planted their vineyards. But I'm here to tell you there's still more out there. And somebody's trying to subdivide it and build a home on it. And we may never, ever know that the greatest vineyard in all the world is sitting among us. The Oregon wine industry is very young, as you know. We have literally hundreds of thousands of acres that slope south and east and south and west on the various Willackinzie and Jory soils in the Willamette Valley that have yet to be proven. Is it possible that that great Grand Cru vineyard is out there and we just don't know yet? And so this whole issue, the political debate regarding secondary lands, is very important because it puts it in an entirely different perspective. We used to think, or at least public policy makers used to think, that farmland to be protected was that really rich soil that was on the valley floor bottom, when in fact, the Oregon wine industry, one of the highest yielding per ton or per acre crops, is located on some of the least valued land in previous thinking. So what I'm here to do is to challenge you to look at the issue of how we can protect this valuable secondary land that previously to this time has been viewed as land open for development. And our futures, our state future, and our position in the world depends on what we do. Now, there are smaller issues, but still important. Many Oregon wineries are very small, and so they obtain their contact with their customer for their retail activities, and yet there's a lot of pressure in the counties to restrict winemakers' ability to serve their customer, to meet their customer at their winery. This is a real problem, and if there's county by county, there's different enforcements of the law. For example, in Marion County, we have a very progressive county commission. They love wine, and so they're very supportive of wineries and retail activities that occur at a winery. But in Washington County, I know that the Washington County winemakers have had a devil of a time trying to improve their businesses and develop contacts, valuable contacts with people who come to visit them. Our product is unique in that we make a connection with our customer by them touching and feeling and seeing the place in which these grapes are grown. So we have to have access to our customer in that way. And it can be done without disrupting the other farming activities that exist. We just have to be innovative about it, and so I'm asking to help there. Now, the other thing that's that happened this past, in the search for revenues, Governor Kitzhaber, I think in an ill-advised moment, proposed an increase in the alcohol taxes without understanding what it would do. It would have increased the excise taxes on some of our wineries by $40,000, $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 a year. It would have made a number of our Oregon wineries, actually it would have broken their loan covenants with their banks. It would have been disaster. Now, fortunately, that tax proposal was turned back, so we need to think very carefully about when we design tax measures to deal with budget shortfalls, we think about what we're doing to our economy. A couple other issues that are important is viticultural research, both improving the quality of wine as well as dealing with threats like disease. Now, Pierce's disease, as you know, been a serious problem in Southern California, and it's been making its way north on with the help of the sharpshooter. And winemakers might be able to tell you more about that if you're interested. The problem is that this is a terrible disease. There's no known cure at this point, and the only way to keep it out of Oregon is to quarantine these products, any kind of nursery products or other products coming into Oregon, to make sure it's prevented, the spread of it is prevented here. Unfortunately, only recently, just this past week, some grapelings were discovered to carry Pierce's disease near Dallas, Oregon. This is a serious matter. And it threatens the entire investment which we've made. And so we need to make sure we, in the time of allocating resources to public agencies, that we have dollars for research to help us with these problems. And the second is, the last point is to improve the support for specialty crop marketing. One of the ways to protect our land and provide a wonderful environment for all of us is to make sure we can market our products that are value-added products. And the federal government did provide a little bit of support this last year in a specialty marketing grants fund, which Oregon had a very small amount of, only about $75,000. But I can tell you that Oregon winemakers can really stretch a dollar. This, by the way, you might have seen this Oregon Winery Guide. Maria Ponzi, sitting back there. Betty O'Brien, the executive director of the Oregon Wine Advisory Board, put this together. It's the best-looking Oregon Winery Guide. They're going to circulate 250,000 a year, which gives you an idea now of the impact that tourism and the Oregon wine industry has on tourism. Tourism is a $6 billion a year business here in Oregon. And respondents, according to Todd Davidson of the Oregon Tourism Commission, rank interest in wineries 5th among all interests. And there's 109 on the list. and visiting the Oregon coast is number one. So it gives you an idea just how important these kinds of tools are. I wanted to make sure that I also mention that Annie Conley is here. Where's Annie? There she is. And she's the new extension that provides viticultural service support from Oregon State University for our industry. So it's, anyway, that just kind of gives you a brief overview, lets you know that we've got a lot of challenges, but an amazing future.
Well, now that we've discussed all the challenges the Oregon wine industry has to face, we get to talk about the passion behind the industry. Unfortunately, I've crossed off half my list of things to discuss, so I want to go back. I think in order to understand the future of the industry or the present industry, we need to understand the past and how the industry was formed, because I find the story of the Oregon wine industry pretty phenomenal. It actually started 200 million years ago. Back when the plates were crashing together, the North American plate and the ocean floor were colliding, the end result were the Cascade Mountains, the Coast Range, and volcanic activity. And this volcanic activity then resulted in the basalt soils that we all fondly refer to as the Jory Clay Loams, the Red Hills of Dundee. These soils are very important to Oregon wine growers. And if you're not familiar with the soils, just come on out and talk to any Oregon winemaker, and they probably can go on for hours about how important the different soils of Oregon are. Jim pointed out that the soils that we all appreciate and talk about are on hillsides, that we all talk about the Willamette Valley as being the premier growing region in the state of Oregon. Truly, it is on the hillsides that all the grapes are grown. And this reason is because the cool air that settles in the spring and in the fall oftentimes needs to drain, and it drains down from the valleys, or I should say from the hillsides into the valley floors. And so not very many vineyards are planted on valley floors due to the risk of frost, or also because the soils are so fertile due to the Missoula floods that came through in about 12,000, 15,000 years ago, depositing all that wonderful, fertile valley floor soils. But it's not the soils we grow our grapes on. As we move forward, I think another interesting historical fact, which I find also very interesting, is that there were wineries here in the state of Oregon in the 1800s. I'm told that actually one of them won a medal at the St. Louis World Fair. So Oregon has a great history of producing great wine. But not until 1975 did Oregon achieve its pre-prohibition levels of winemaking. So that's pretty spectacular to think about. As these pioneers came to Oregon, I have to say the thing as a younger winemaker, born after I should say, some of these guys arrived in Oregon, it's kind of a thrill to be here working with the original pioneers, that they're still here, they're still active, and they're still involved in the Oregon wine industry. So I consider them to be the pioneers, the first generation. The decisions they made were benchmark decisions, and without those decisions, this industry would not be what it is. I can imagine David Lett coming to the state of Oregon. He graduated from my alma mater and was basically told he was nuts. It's too cold, it's too wet, it rains all the time, you can't grow Pinot Noir up there. And he made that decision to come forward and try planting Pinot Noir, and look at us today. It's pretty amazing. For me, I've been here for 15 years, and it's fun to look around and see some of the original ideas that these guys had, and probably due to creativity, because there were no suppliers up in the state of Oregon, there were no specialized winemaking equipment. It all had to be imported, bagged, borrowed, bought, used from California, and brought up. They became very creative in their use of winemaking equipment. And I think one of my favorite pieces of Oregon winemaking equipment is what we fondly refer to as the Oregon fermenter. It's a 4x4x4, and I believe it was a cherry bin that was used to ferment their Pinot Noir in. You know what? To this day, we still use them. And the thing is, they've become more modernized. Now they have little spigots on the bottom sometimes. They're double-walled. There are actually companies producing these bins, which we all started using way back when as cherry-picking bins. The next wave of Oregon winemakers to kind of come in, and I refer to them as the second generation. The second generation came with the education in winemaking, the experience, the training. They didn't come blindly to Oregon. Dick was already here. We came because we have a passion for the grape, the lifestyle. There were things that we could all do. We could maybe make our mark in the Oregon wine industry. It was an exciting time to be a young person coming up to Oregon. And it's interesting to note that this second wave of winemakers that came up was like a one-way exodus from California. Names like Ken Wright, Tony Soder's now up here, Eric Hamacher is another one, myself, Steve Dorner. A lot of us came from California, abandoned careers down there to make wine in the state of Oregon, and we've now put down roots and built wineries here in the state of Oregon. I have to mention the third generation because they're sitting in the room. I consider the third generation now to be the children of a lot of these founding fathers and mothers, and they're now in the industry working together with their parents and also taking on leadership roles. So not only do we have our pioneers, but we have their children all to work together. Today, being a part of the Oregon industry is pretty exciting. We have a lot more resources. Jim and Dick both touched on some of these things. Things like we have Oregon Vineyard Supply down in Lafayette that supplies just the specialized equipment you need for your vineyards. You can walk in there on any given day and find any kind of technical tool that you might need to clip your wires together or a certain pruning shear that you wanted to use with a hook on it. We also have Davison Auto Supply. I love this. Davison Auto Supply. You walk in there through the fan belts, past the chains and everything else, and you go and ask for some tartaric acid, or I want the BR45 yeast. Do you have it? And they do. They're supplying industry from 1 pound to 100 pounds of yeast. You can walk back there, and Terry Sherwood prides himself in knowing exactly what you need. I keep trying to trick him, and I bring a piece and go, all right, find this. 2 days later, it's delivered to my door. He's awesome. It's also nice to notice that we now have a new lab. ETS Labs, which is down in the state of California, has been performing analytical analysis for winemakers for the last 20 years. They now have a satellite office up here in McMinnville. So as a winemaker, you can run your analysis right on in, and there they are. And it's just a thrill to be able to get 24 analysis rather than having to UPS it down, wait for your analysis to come back. It really improves the quality of the Oregon wine industry. I also think we have to acknowledge all that's gone on in the state of Oregon, particularly with OSU. It was due to connections at the International Pinot Noir celebration that a lot of the Dijon clone Pinot Noirs came to Oregon. These are very vital to our industry because these clones of Pinot Noir actually show maturity about 7 to 10 days earlier than the traditional Pommard clone of Pinot Noir. OSU was instrumental in getting those cleared and brought to the state of Oregon, and now are distributed down in California, Canada. You can pretty much go into New York and find that clone being planted, and that's thanks to OSU bringing that in. We also have enology help at OSU. We have Annie here now for the viticultural extension agencies. And then Chemeketa Community College is also now starting a program to help train young people to be vital members of the Oregon wine industry. It's very necessary to get people trained so that they can come into our cellars and help us out. Instead of having to hire people and train them, we're now able to bring students in and train those. And last, I should talk about some of the really unique programs that the Oregon industry has created and continues to sponsor. One is the LIVE program. It's a low input and viticulture and enology program. It's because the Oregon wine growers want to be caretakers of the land and make sure that the land is taken care of for future generations. Rather than going in and using pesticides and spraying heavily, they're trying to promote very healthy vineyard sites using as organic methodology or low input as we possibly can. Salmon Safe to protect the waterways. Salute barrel auction to protect our workers in the vineyards. We every year have an annual barrel auction that raises money, if you're not familiar with this, to help provide health care for the vineyard workers and winery workers. And again, the International Pinot Noir Celebration and Oregon Pinot Camp, all Oregon industry driven. It's important to know that Oregon, anywhere actually, winemaking is a once-a-year opportunity. You only get that chance. That fruit comes in once. If you blow it, it's all over. So any Oregon winemaker only has the opportunity to truly make maybe 30 to 40 vintages in her lifetime. Now, if you start at 10, like some of the Ponzis, you might get a few more vintages in there. But what this done is led to a cooperative spirit amongst Oregon winemakers. We realize we only get one opportunity, and you want to learn as much as you possibly can. And it's exciting to see the way the Oregon industry works together to, say, solve a question or answer something that they're curious about. I've worked myself with 3 different cooperative groups where we've done things like early thinning trials in our vineyard sites and then made commercial wines and taken them out, showed these to people, said, what do you think? What do you think about this? Try that. And it's actually led to a changing in the way, or a change in the thought process in what we all used to think about thinning. We're actually thinning earlier than we've ever thinned in the past because we did these commercial experiments, tasted them amongst each other, and made a decision. We've also done things like, it's called a terroir trial, where 3 of us got together and made wine from 3 different vineyard sites, sat down, tasted it, tried to decide, is the winemaker more important or is the vineyard more important? It's been a lot of fun because it becomes a tic-tac-toe of winemaking, but it's also great because we can take these trials out on the road and use them as marketing tools also. Education is very important in marketing, so anything that we can bring out into the market and educate people about Oregon is very well received. I think, for me, in conclusion, what is so exciting about the Oregon industry and the next generation is truly the camaraderie. I think the earlier starts in winemaking and marketing were difficult. I have to say, I've only been here for 15 years, and I experienced going out into the marketplace and having to bring a United States map to show people where Portland, Oregon was. Now, it's hard to believe. I was in the military. I knew where Oregon was. But many people don't realize that there is a state in between Washington and California. That's slowly changing. But those early marketing trips, when you were out there trying to promote Oregon Pinot, there would be people that say, I don't touch the stuff. So it's hard when people wouldn't even try it to try to get out there and promote it and encourage them to buy it. It's a lot more fun out in the marketplace, though we do have quite a bit of challenges. The economic downturn is difficult. It means we all have to concentrate and focus more on our marketing, in our own backyard even. But as a winemaking group, we oftentimes travel together, and the camaraderie amongst all of us and the fact that we enjoy each other's company, we're out there to promote Oregon first and our brand second, seems to really set the stage for some very successful marketing trips. So in conclusion, I think this is an exciting time. It's a scary time, but the Oregon wine industry has risen to the challenge time and time again, and we're all ready to take on the next challenge.
Now, batting cleanup with this team is not always easy. We're all sitting here writing off what they said that I was going to say, what I wanted to. But my charge here was to discuss the challenges that face the industry in terms of distribution and marketing, and to comment on the quality of Oregon wines. And those of you who know me, I talk a lot, and it's not hard for me to talk. But after I wrote this, I actually kind of quite liked it, so I thought I might kind of stick to my notes here. You know, this is a 30-year evolving story, and the challenge to try to select the right elements to discuss and squeeze into this little 10-minute presentation is tricky, and I hope that I've chosen wisely. Why am I qualified to stand up here and tell this story? Well, I started in the wholesale business in the early 80s, as you were told earlier, and we started in this business right about the same time that the Oregon wine industry was starting, and so they were right in our backyard, and we wanted to be part of it. They were learning to be winemakers while we were learning to be wholesalers. So I was really a witness to and had a chance to play a part in this developing story. For me, Pinots of place, personality, and passion, and sales and marketing are all about perception. As you've heard from everybody on this panel, it was that spirit of individuality that defined the first wave of Oregon winemakers. People like Richard Summer, Dick Erath, Dick Ponzi, David Lett, David Adelsheim, Bill and Susan Blosser came here early and embraced the growing of this elusive Pinot Noir grape with a passion. And let me give you a little perspective to kind of try to tie what you've heard all together. The 60s and 70s, when the wine pioneers came here, the only frame of reference that most people had was the domestic production was of California wines and the sunny Napa Valley. They might have heard of the legendary vineyards of Europe, but most had never seen them and knew little about them. The idea of cool climate grapes was unknown to most consumers. Only our pioneers were perceived as crazies, clearing and planting vineyards in the pouring rain. People knew Oregon weather, they knew California weather, and it was clear to them where you could grow good grapes. The 200-pound gorilla in this whole deal of domestic wine production is Cabernet. It's relatively easy to grow abundantly in varieties of climates and produce a deeply colored, moderately tannic wine that can absorb lots and lots of sweet vanilla oak flavors, which are basically the catnip for all people who have what we refer to as the New World palate, as opposed to the more restrained European style. But these are the big, plush, fruit-forward wines that have become the gold standard for most people in terms of red wine, their evaluation and judgment of red wines. Pinot by nature lacks one color pigment and does not produce as deeply a colored wine. Pinot is more subtle. It exhibits layers of nuances and aromas of pure red fruits and hints of sweet oak. It's the perfume of the gods. Pinot is not a wine you make. Pinot is a wine you nurture. The wine is a reflection of where the grapes are grown. They absorb the nuances of the soil and the microclimate and express them with refined purity. The task of making wine is shepherding these grapes from the vine to the bottle with the subtlety of a diamond cutter's hand. It's a delicate balance, reflects the personality of the winemaker, and every winemaker's decision is filtered through his or her belief and experience patterns. The dream of making perfect Pinot is often referred to as the search for the Holy Grail in winemaking. So from the beginning, you have a hard-to-grow grape that is not recognized by most of the consuming public. It's grown in a state that has nationally a reputation that it rains all the time, and it's being done by a very small, dedicated group of pioneer believers. Their limited resources, as we've heard, went into their planting, into cobbling together just enough equipment to make the wine, and then hope to God they had enough finances to hang on for the 2+ years it took to get their wines to maturity, so someone would buy them. Now, they may have naively believed that if they made it, someone would come to buy it. But the cold reality was that when most of the early wines were produced, they were flawed. Many of them were flawed. Remember that when you make wine, as Lynn pointed out, only once a year, and Mother Nature's pitching you a curve at every turn, you really have a lot of variables that you have to take into consideration, and there's not a lot of experience or time to do that. The early rap on Oregon wines was that they were made by nutcases up there trying to make wine in the rain, and it wasn't very good. And you all know that it's really tough to overcome a first impression. It was really the steadfast pioneer spirit, I think, that all faced the difficulties that the wine community pulled together during those early years, and they were able to sustain themselves. They stuck together as tightly as they could. They were believers, and they continued to allow others. They continued to nurture the belief in their group. But as the amount of wine increased and the quality of that wine increased, it was this particular pioneer spirit that really made it difficult for them to come together and speak with one voice when it came to actually getting out there and marketing their wines. It was during this time when their individuality really surfaced, and it was difficult. It was really difficult for us to get the Oregon story told. The distribution pattern has represented a real challenge for these people. Wine's an alcoholic beverage. It's therefore a controlled substance. It's overseen by the BATF, Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and it's considered post-prohibition to be a states' rights issue. So every state, even counties and sometimes townships, have the right to control what goes on within their boundaries. The system is really driven by what's called a 3-tiered system, which means there's the importer or producer, there's the wholesaler, the tax collector, and there's the retailer restaurateur. And this is all held in place by force of law. So we don't have a whole lot of options. The high consuming states tend to have big distributorships, and the big distributorships, the last thing they wanted or needed was a wine that no one had ever heard from a region that no one had ever heard from a grape that consumers didn't think fit the profile. I mean, they thought it should be Cabernet. It didn't look like Cabernet. It didn't walk like Cabernet. Therefore, it couldn't be credible. And it was exacerbated by the fact that Pinot Noir, to be any good, needs to come from small yielding productions, 2.5 tons to the acre, compared to Cab, where you get 5, 7 tons to the acre, and it still produces a drinkable wine. The availability of the small handcrafted wines did spawn some of the smaller distributors who were able to maybe get out into the public view and really hand sell their wines. But the truth of it is that there was fierce competition to be either in a good distributorship or in a small distributor who could really represent your wines. I think the net of what happened is that the Oregon producers came to understand that they were going to have to get their fannies on airplanes and get out there and tell the Oregon story. And that was a difficult thing. Most of them thought they were going to come here, make wine, people were going to come and buy it, and it was all going to be wonderful. Well, they were finding themselves putting hours and hours on the road trying to sell wine. But I think the critical thing about this was that they were out there walking the streets, telling their story, tasting their wines, and little by little, they created what's known in the industry as pull-through. People actually liked what they saw, they liked what they tasted, they began to understand. and they began to ask for these products. And distributors who were only in the business to sell wine, they were there to deliver them. So I think that what we saw, and I think a lot of winemakers would remember that you had to kiss a lot of toads in those days to get your story told. But these were people who actually went out, and I think it's critically important to understand that their impact on being in the public eye, getting out in front of the public, really drove the reality of the development of Oregon wines from a distribution and marketing standpoint. I'm going to touch briefly on 3 pieces of legislation at home. Basically, the people who, in your own markets, you need a good, strong marketing system because you should be turning everybody in your neighborhood into prophets, and they should be going out there and telling your story broadly. The problem was that the people that thought they were the craziest were their neighbors. I mean, they knew what the weather was like around here, and they didn't think this could be done. So there was not a really directed effort to sell wine, even here in Oregon, to Oregonians. But once people began to pull together in some form the legislative things that created, first they were allowed to have, they created a tax on grapes and also a 1 cent a gallon tax on wine that was brought into the state of Oregon, and therefore there was this little pool of money that created the Oregon Wine Advisory Board. Wineries were allowed to have tasting rooms that were not necessarily at their wineries. And this allowed them to make that contact that Jim talked about with their public and actually get people out there to see and understand. And finally, there was the wine shipments bill. And that was the task force that I actually sat on, the task force that created that bill, and what the intention of that legislation was to be able to allow Oregon or any winemaker to ship small quantities of wines across state lines without paying tax. Now, obviously, this was pretty controversial, and it took us 2 legislative sessions to get it through here in the state of Oregon, because basically, understand, the states collect significant taxes from alcoholic beverages, and the gatekeepers there are the wholesalers. And the wholesalers, of course, being the gatekeepers there, also, that's protecting their businesses, so they don't want this to pass. There are about 14 states now that are allowing some form of reciprocity, which I think has been significant in helping Oregon wineries and other wineries from around the country to be able to sell their wares. From my perspective, Oregon has reached a critical mass in the distribution pattern, which has allowed us to create that wedge which both the quality of the wines and the region deserves. This doesn't mean that everyone's going to be guaranteed that their wines are going to sell or that their wineries are going to be successful. I think there are significant threats on a going forward basis from overproduction. We didn't really talk about it today, but there is just a ton of fruit out there, not just in Oregon, in California. There's way more grapes out there that we have the capacity to crush. I say we like I'd ever done this, right? No, but I mean that the industry could crush here in Oregon, and it's worse in California. So when you get that glut of production, then what happens? It generally causes prices to fall, and that's not good for the industry. So we face a lot of the challenge, I think, of overproduction. But I think the important thing is that the wines of Oregon, from both the trade, the distribution pattern, they've all come of age. These are wines that are appreciated and valued for the quality that they represent. So I hope that I haven't taken too much time here hopping through my quick history of the Oregon wine industry, because I think the history is completely relevant to what is going on today. It's still a tough grape to grow. It still costs money. There's still a lot of competition for it out there, and I think we face those challenges. I have a passion for wine and for the culture surrounding it, and I share that with the people who produce it and consume it. I've spent my entire life in the wine industry, and I'm privileged to say that I eat and drink for a living. So it was fun for me to be here. It was really hard. I had a lot of things I wanted to tell you all, so I hope I haven't taken too long.
Well, first I'd like to note the splendid precedent of having wine glasses on the table at City Club's Friday Forum. This panel is clearly a very good influence on us. I grew up in a society in which it was very usual to drink sherry as an aperitif. And I was always mystified by the huge number of bottles that everyone always had, until I realized that there was a reason behind it. Those who didn't like Franco's politics had to drink South African sherry, and those who didn't like South Africa's politics had to drink, they chose to drink Spanish sherry. Those who didn't like the politics of either country were stuck with either Cyprus or Australia, which wasn't very good at that time. On top of that, high church people drank dry sherry, and Low Church people drank sweet sherry. Now, I suspect that there are equally complicated socio-political aspects of the wine industry, and I'm curious as to what our panel members have encountered in the Oregon wine market.
Dick, you've been at it long.
Well, I'm not sure if this is a response to that, but I know that people say they like dry wines, but they really drink sweet wines. So people want to be very sophisticated in terms of what they're drinking, as to what their neighbors are drinking, so they want to be into it. Going back to the early days of the industry, it was a white wine market. And at that time, Chardonnay was on, Sauvignon Blancs were on, and people were drinking all white wines. And here we were again in Oregon doing Pinot Noir. So that was another fad. But now the trends have changed. I think more people are drinking red wines now. I think more people are understanding Pinot Noir, particularly because those who were drinking white wines find Pinot Noir as a much more accessible wine as a transition. So you have these trends and you have these changes, and sometimes it is political, but you have to deal with that. And incidentally, when you're making wines, you're always you're making it today to be sold in 2 years. So who knows what the trend will be in 2 years?
Press, Dr. Ed Press, City Club member, coming after Patty Tillet's very well introduced question makes it tough to ask any kind of question. But I'm going to take a chance anyway. First, I should preface this to say that I have no financial interest in the question I'm about to ask. My financial interest is in Jim Bernau's organization, where I was a early stock purchaser. So my question about this is for Dick Ponzi and Susan Kelly, and it relates to the Adelsheim winery. I noticed nobody mentioned, except Karen said something about David Adelsheim. I don't know David, but I used to play squash with his father, and I lost all the time. And I was just curious, why didn't you say anything about it's an early winery, I think, and for all I know, they're bankrupt now, but I wonder why you didn't say anything about them at all.
Well, there's a lot to be said about the industry, and David Adelsheim is certainly part of that history. And I could tell you, they're not bankrupt, no way.
Okay, I didn't know that.
I wish I had their winery. I mean, that would be something. David was involved in the wine industry in the early days.
That's what I thought.
I remember our meetings, with a handful of the growers at that time, and David was there about mid-'70s. And he did plant a vineyard about mid-'70. Unfortunately, that vineyard had to be replanted in the late '70s, and David had to take a second start at it in the '80s.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and also, to give David credit, he was involved in the early days and helped draft the Oregon wine labeling laws that we inflicted onto ourselves. But again, to make the industry as a more honest industry, we did a little more truth in labeling with our industry, with our labeling laws, and David was very influential in that part of it. And the clones that Lynn was mentioning, David was instrumental in bringing those clones to OSU through the acquaintances that he had and other members had with Burgundy.
Thank you.
Our broadcast portion is going to end in a few seconds, but if it's all right with the panelists, if we could go ahead with some questions, because I know there's a lot. Is that okay?
Okay, sure.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Paul Milius, City Club member. I have been working with one of your cohorts, Ankeny Vineyard, and doing some marketing for them up here in the Portland area. You folks have talked a lot about Pinot Noir, and so I'm going to ask two questions, but you talked a lot about Pinot Noir and emphasized that, but we're producing some really great Chardonnay, we've got a great Pinot Gris, and we're even bottling some very, very good Maréchal Foch, which we're billing as Oregon's other great red wine. But what would you comment on other varietals, other kinds of grapes that we might see as a growing part of this wine family? And my second question is a legal and procedural one, I guess. Would you comment on the role of OLCC and their regulations and how you find that either a benefit or a hindrance to doing business? Thank you.
I'd just like to comment on the white wine question, because part of my discussion today, which I didn't really get into, was when I came in 1988, I have to say that whites were outselling reds. Pinot Gris was a big variety and growing, and people were encouraged to plant Pinot Gris because it seemed to be, as people put it, Oregon's next cash cow. Now there's quite a bit of Pinot Gris out there, and they're discovering that truly it's not quite as easy to turn around Pinot Gris and make as much money as originally intended, because to truly make fine Pinot Gris, like you make fine Pinot Noir, you need to control your crop loads. And so that's part of the white wine question. I also understand there's many other varietals in the state of Oregon. We at Penner-Ash Wine Cellars are making Syrah as one of our red wines too. There's quite a few very exciting varietals coming on, and they're coming on stronger and stronger. But I think where Oregon's mark in the marketplace was made, probably outside its borders, was with Pinot Noir, and I think that's why we tend to gravitate in our discussions on Pinot Noir.
Yeah, the thing that I try to emphasize is that Oregon is very unique, and we're dealing with a very unique variety of Pinot Noir. And along with that, however, there are the other regions of Oregon, and they have climatic conditions that lend themselves to other varieties. And there will be other varieties shown, Syrahs, for example, in the warmer regions. But I'd have to say that it's not as unique in terms of where you can grow Syrah, where you can grow some of the warmer climates. There are more warmer climates than the unique climates that we have for Pinot Noir in Oregon. It's very unique, and that's what I think we have to go with. But it doesn't mean that these other areas aren't going to create as well other varieties. There's just more competition for Cabernet Sauvignon because it can be grown in more areas. Maréchal Foch can be grown in many other states. It's a hybrid. And we don't want to be like any other state. You know, every state in the Union has a wine industry. Unfortunately, most of them are regional wine industries. That is, they market out of their wine cellars and they market in their tasting rooms, and they're not very unique. So, Oregon's unique. It's different.
The OLCC question.
Oh, OLCC. Jim, why don't you hit that one?
The Oregon Liquor Control Commission enforces regulations on the service of alcohol, and they're quite good at it. And they work extensively with our industry in improving our activities at wine festivals. So the industry has enjoyed a very constructive, productive relationship with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. The one thing that I think some of you know is that